Hey, and welcome back to the Damn Parenting Podcast, the show for international families navigating life, love, and parenthood here in the Netherlands. This is a community spotlight episode, and I mean that literally. We're shining a light on a community that exists right here in the Netherlands that is doing something quiet, important, and beautiful work for families who don't always see themselves reflected in the mainstream parenting conversations. I'm talking about Queer Families NL, a community that holds space for LGBTQ parents, parents-to-be, and their kids right here in the Netherlands. So whether you're a queer parent yourself, you're co-parenting across identities, or you're raising children in a rainbow family, or simply a parent who wants your child to grow up in a world with more visibility and less othering, this episode is for you. Today, joining me is Aldo, one of the people behind Queer Families NL. Aldo, welcome to Damn Parenting.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Well, before we get into everything right now, I do want to jump right to the beginning. Can you actually let us know, how did Queer Families NL come to exist? What's your story?
Yeah, so we've been around since March of 2024, when my daughter was just a few months old. My husband and I had been trying to become dads for about 10 years, and for 10 years we had been so focused on like how to get pregnant, how to stay pregnant, how to have a baby, that when she finally arrived, she was born through surrogacy in Canada, and so when we came back home to the Netherlands, I looked around and I thought, oh my God, I forgot to build a community for her. And of course, we had, a multitude of cis-het friends who had had babies and whatnot, but I didn't have a little network of rainbow babies, as I like to call them, for her to grow up. And just like you said, just so that she wouldn't feel othered. So I started looking around for parenting groups. I found a ton in English. I'm originally from California, so I wanted something in English to, have the quick, Q&A of like, hey, she's got, diaper rash. What do I do? Hey, how do you bring down fevers? Just the normal new parent questions. And so I found a bunch of English-speaking groups that I joined, but they were pretty much like cis-het, and a lot of them were moms only, which I respected. So some let me in, some others said, no, this is a women's only space, and I respected that, and there's a need for that as well. So, they would point me to the direction of other groups. So I started joining groups, joined the dads group, bunch of mom groups, but it wasn't filling my need, right? I wanted community. I wanted my people. And I found some in Dutch, but ik spreek je Pinyana taal. So, I didn't want it to feel like a Google translation exercise every time I had a question. And I just could not find anything for queer families in English in the Netherlands. And so in that we tried for 10 years, we had met a lot of other intended parents in that time. And so I started reaching out to them and like saying, hey, I have this idea for a new group. Do you think it's a good idea? A, and B, would you be interested in joining? And they were like, heck yeah, let's do it. And so I intended for the group to be no more than like 4 or 5 families. I would have been more than happy with 4 or 5 families, because I thought, my daughter could then grow up with 4 or 5 other little babies, and, she could have her little posse. But before we knew it, word got out, and families in other cities in the Netherlands started reaching out, saying like, hey, I've been looking for something like this for years. My kid is in school now, or I have a teenager, or folks that were intending on becoming parents as well. And so we just started letting people in, and just, it felt like, I don't know, maybe 6 months, the thing just exploded. And we're currently at about 250 members from all over the country. The common denominator is that you've got to speak English, and you've got to be a queer identified family. So like you said, whether you're a queer parent yourself, or you're parenting a queer identified child, or you're an intended parent who is also queer. So yeah, that's just that was the beginning, and it's just been growing ever since.
Did the community you imagine match the one that actually showed up?
Yes. They always say careful what you ask for, because you might get it, right? And I just never expected it or imagined it to be this large, right? So in the beginning, I used to plan monthly meetups, because my whole point was for my kid to see other families like ours. I didn't just want it to be like a Facebook anonymous group, type sort of thing digitally. And so in the beginning, we used to meet once a month, and I would have to basically like beg and plead for people to show up, play dates, coffees, parks. People were not in the habit. And as the community grew, I started, kind of volunteering parents in other cities to arrange the meetups in their cities to, make it easier for them to show up and to also draw more families in their areas. And so we started dividing, the responsibility that way. And it just, like I said, the community just exploded and we started receiving families from practically every corner of the rainbow. So it became more than I had ever hoped for, in that my daughter now sees literally all kinds of families and little brand new babies, babies in utero, all the way up to teenagers. So it's just, it's beautiful. It's really representative of our community. And I was very naive, I feel like, in the beginning to think that I was going to maybe only find 4 or 5 families like ours.
Oh, that's lovely. What about queer families, NL? How does it look like today? What does someone experience when they actually connect with you?
Yeah, so now because we've grown so quickly, and in the beginning, I was just doing everything trial by error, of course. So I would just, everybody that would get the link would, message me, and I would just let people in left and right. And we quickly realized that not everybody who was in the group was actually queer or was actually aware of what the intent of the community was or who we were. So there are a lot of looky-loos type sort of people, right? And so I started had to messaging people one by one and say like, hey, are you actually X, Y, and Z, and do you know what this is about? And a lot of people were like, well, I actually don't know what queer is, or I wanted to see who was in the group, and so we had to, start cleaning house a little bit, and so that made me realize that I needed a committee of other members to help me navigate the group, and so we created a steering committee of other members to, help come up with ground rules, for example, or questions to ask, to do screenings at the beginning that I do. So people have to go through a 2-step screening process with me directly and just answering, just basic questions so that I know that they know who we are and what kind of group they're getting into, and that they will do so respectfully and with the intent of being kind within the community with other members.
And what kind of events, because you mentioned there earlier, like, there's a picnic
Mhm.
or a play date or whatever. What kind of ways are you providing
In the
environments?
beginning, it used to just be like once a month, literally picnics at a park or, meeting up at a kids' cafe, or if somebody was having a birthday party, we'd show up there. But nowadays, members will just create their own events. And so we do everything from parents only, like comedy shows that night, because parents need to have fun as well, right? Or, barbecues at people's homes. We do story time at the library now. So all kinds of things, anything you can think of that folks, I always say to people, like, if it's something that your family is doing or participating in, feel free to make it an event in the group, and you might get one other family, you might get 10. You never know, and so the point is to connect with other families so that the kids can start meeting each other and seeing each other and familiarizing themselves with one another. And the more often we do that, the easier it'll be for them and us as well as the grown-ups.
You were saying there that you're found everywhere in the Netherlands. You're trying to reach
Mhm.
all corners of it. How does location actually work for you guys? Is it a case of you where you're based in your city, or is it a case of everyone's traveling around because it's, yeah, connecting with your community?
Yeah, so the person who is coordinating the event will typically do it in the city where they live, and then everybody's invited to join. So the rest of us will travel to them because we've got families, literally in Eindhoven, in Breda, in Groningen, like in every corner. And that's the beauty about the queer community, is that we literally exist everywhere, right? And so if you're looking for that, and if you have a need for, if you're the kind of personality like I am that has a need for community and you're looking for it, you can typically find us, and you can find your people pretty much anywhere you move to in the world.
And I want to ask you about the families you serve, because queer families is not a monolith.
Mhm.
Who do you see coming through the doors, so to speak? Like, what does the range look like?
We've got everything from solo parents by choice, solo parents by divorce, parents who come from previously, heteronormative relationship. We've got 2 dad families, 2 mom families. Polyamorous community is also represented. babies, through IVF, through adoption, you name it, it's represented, and it's beautiful and mind-boggling at the same time. I've learned so much just through conversations and the chats in the group. Right now, we've broken the community up into I want to say 14 other subgroups that people are interested in. So there's, subgroups for some of the larger cities, for example, The Hague, Amsterdam, Harlem, that sort of thing. And then there's also subgroups by interest. So, there's a queer book club. There's a writing club. The bouldering club has their own little meetups. So it's pretty diverse.
How is it navigating all of this through the Dutch language and the culture? Is there a big effort there that needs to be maintained? Because there's a lot of people moving to the Netherlands. So obviously they wouldn't be Dutch themselves. And so how is that working? Is there quite a lot of support needed to help them navigate the Dutch language?
That's a great point. So because the group is an English only group, it attracts a lot of the international immigrants and expats that were already living in the Netherlands, right? And so I, for example, have been here for 13 years, and so there are other families that have been here longer and whatnot. So we have a pretty good grasp on the local culture. And when I started the group, I honestly was envisioning only targeting the international community. But before long, Dutch people started joining. I would always ask, well, awesome, you're welcome. But in my little brain, I would assume you already had your community here. And their answer was pretty much usually the same. They were like, yeah, I have my queer community, but I'm the only parent in my circle. So my friends don't get it. And so I realized that my kids didn't have access to other kids like ours, right? And I was like, oh my God, of course, that makes perfect sense, right? And so the Dutch people in the group try to help navigate those sort of questions, of course. Like you said, recently we've seen a big wave of US families moving to the Netherlands. And so we've seen a lot of them coming into the group. And so we've created, for example, a newcomers subgroup for the US folks. And so they've branched out and started, the intro to Dutch, subgroups. They have their Q&A for the regular questions that you have as a newcomer to the Netherlands of hey, people are staring at me. Am I doing something wrong? It's no, that's just the pastime here, right? So little nuances like that we try to support one another with and provide a softer landing. Because I remember how lonely it was for me when I moved here. My husband is Dutch, and when I moved here, I knew no one other than him and his family, right? And so just having to build a community from scratch at a grown-up age was not easy, and it was not fun. And so it's lovely to watch people just, be able to come in and already have this pre-made community, and they can engage as little or as much as they want to hopefully provide like I said, a softer landing for themselves and for the kids.
So you mentioned there about a lot of Americans specifically coming here to the Netherlands. Mm-hmm. The Netherlands does have a reputation as being one of the most progressive countries in the world for LGBTQ rights. The first country, obviously, to legalize same-sex marriage, after all. So I'm curious, does the reputation match the lived reality for queer families here?
Not always. For example, I'll use my family as an example. We moved here because at the time when my husband and I met, I lived in California, like I said, and he lived here. And so we were doing the long distance thing. And at the time, it was legal for me to marry another same-sex U.S. citizen in the States. I could not marry a foreigner that was same-sex. So that was still being disputed in the Supreme Court. And so we waited and waited and waited for the Supreme Court to overturn that clause in the law that prohibited me from marrying him as a male foreigner, right? But in the time that it took, it was about almost 3 years, and we were going broke doing all the international traveling, and so it came to head, right? And we were like, okay, well, do we either break up, or does one of us bite the bullet and move to the other one's country? And so I advocated for him to just stay. And I said, just overstay your visa and be undocumented here. And when the law changes, I'll marry you, and, we'll process your paperwork. And that's how my country was built on, was, undocumented immigrants coming over and taking over, basically, right? And so And he retorted with, well, why would I want to be undocumented in your crazy little country when I can bring you legally to my country just on a boyfriend visa? And I was like, what? You've got boyfriend visas? Like, that's wild. And so, I moved over here, and our idea from our very first date was always to be dads. And so we naively thought that with the Netherlands being the first country in the world to legalize same-sex marriage, that family law would equally be as advanced. But lo and behold, it was not. And so by the time we got here, got settled, got married, and got ready to start our parenting journey, we started meeting roadblocks for queer people trying to build families. And so we realized that while it was impossible for us to be legally married in my country, starting our family there was 100 years easier than it was here, right? And so we realized just in our dynamic that, like, nowhere is perfect. Every country has its flaws, and there's room for improvement everywhere. But we ultimately decided to stay here, and we see it in other families in the group as well, with things like as small as, depending on the gemeente that you live in, for example, you can have an easy time registering your baby or your pregnancy if you're a queer couple than others, So, for example, in our gemeente, we basically had a 2-year legal fight to gain custody of our child on paper, even though she was our kid and she was born in Canada, as I said. And we had all the documents that the lawyers required, but it's ultimately up to the civil servants in that respective gemeente. So, yes, there are advantages here for queer families, but there are a lot of pitfalls and hardships that you have to have the stomach and patience to navigate. So things, for example, like in the US community that's coming in, they're seeing a lot of wait times for gender affirming care here that don't exist or haven't existed in the past in the US. And that's obviously changing now, which is what's bringing them here, right? So it's a lot of hard lessons to learn as an immigrant when you're moving to a new country. You can do a lot of research and prepare yourself as much as you can, but you don't know what you don't know until you get there, right?
Yeah. You mentioned there about community. You were saying about how you'd spent 10 years, obviously trying to have your daughter, and then you forgot about, oh, but I need the community for after she arrives. So
Mm.
about the children, how do you think about the experience of kids growing up in queer families? Like, what role does the community actually play for them specifically?
Yeah. So like I said, when we started doing the meetups, I think my daughter was around maybe 5 or 6 months old when we held the very first meetup. So obviously at that age, she wasn't grasping much, right? It wasn't until she turned 2 that we were actually at City Hall with the Queer Families group, doing a hearing exactly on telling the powers that be our experience as queer families at their gemeente and basically advocating for change, right? And so we had spent the whole morning with the families, and there was one other baby there that morning with her 2 dads. And, so the kids are playing, we're, talking to the politicians, yada, 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 right? I'm not paying much mind to how the kids are interacting or what she may or may not be taking in, right? I was just laser focused on what we were there for advocating that morning. And when we got home, I remember putting her down for a nap, and everything went normally. And when she woke up from her nap, she jumps up and she calls me mama. And she jumps up and she says, "Mama, mama, mama, baby Sophia heeft 2 papas. Kaya heeft 2 papas ook," she says, right? The other baby has two dads, and I have 2 dads too. And in that moment, I completely melted because I thought, oh my God, she gets it. And the group is doing exactly what I had hoped it would do for her, right? She's seeing herself in baby Sophia, and it's normal for her, right? And they always say, babies will normalize whatever you as a parent will make normal for them, right? And so in that moment, I just thought I was so happy for her that to realize in that moment that she was going to grow up with that notion of belonging to something greater than just the 3 of us, right? And in so doing, hopefully not feeling othered for too long once she hits school age and the kids start being kids, around her. And so hopefully that she would have the support from her peers within the group. We see that now also with the teenagers in the group. There's a lot of families, and I always thank them for, moving to this country and moving the kids out of the US if they're queer identified to protect them from what's coming, right? A lot of us have a different reality with our biological families where we're not accepted and we're kind of pushed out at the families. And here we see families literally putting their careers and their livelihoods and everything on hold or throwing it all away just to move somewhere where their child is safer, right? So the teenagers support one another as well. And we see it just happening naturally within the group.
You're making a difference for the future of the kids, obviously. So speaking of the future, what is on the horizon for queer families and now? What are you intending to build towards? What's the community going to look like, for example, in 2, 3, 4, 5 years?
The honest answer is I don't know. We're kind of just building it as it's sailing. I hope, there will still be, a group in 2 or 3 years. Ideally, in an ideal world, there won't be a need for it, but we know that ideal doesn't really exist. I always say to people, one of the moms in the group made this distinction for me, and so I try to like remind the new folks that are coming in that some folks are looking for community, other folks are looking for friendship. So it's very important to navigate your entry into the group, knowing what it is that you're looking for and what your family's looking for, right? Just to set up your own expectations. I see, like I said, tons of different subgroups forming, and through that different friend groups form organically, and it's beautiful to watch. And it's been very healing for me as an immigrant from the US who felt forced out of my own country because of who I fell in love with, to see, the group just growing organically and people from all over the world that have similar experiences because they're queer with their own governments or with their own biological families, just finding community here. And it was all thanks to like a crazy little idea that I had for a WhatsApp group. Like, who knew, right? So, we're working on a documentary for telling the story of some of the families that are experiencing what they're experiencing in the US and moving here for safety and prosperity, realizing that the American dream was really just a nightmare, and hoping that that nightmare doesn't follow us here too soon. So yeah, there's a lot of dreams that I have for the group. I'm already setting up meetings with Hamenta to talk about Pride next year. We just celebrated Pride this year and included, this is our second year participating in Pride, and kind of just hoping to grow, the family contingent at Pride every year a little bit more. We're just interested. I'm curious to see what the next generation does now that the teenagers are, like getting their footing into their young adulthood, and kind of just giving them opportunities to also like, lead the way within the group of, what they want, what they need. Also, I'm sure there's things that we as adults are not grasping. So we're open, I'd say. We're open for change. We're open for it all.
And a last question here, and this is for anyone listening who is a queer parent themselves, or parent who's queer adjacent, or just someone who wants to show up as an ally in this space. What would you want to say to them, or what would you like them to know?
Well, for the folks who are queer, or, our parents and or are intending to be parents, IPs as we call them, we're here if you need community. I remember for 10 years, I would just join Facebook groups and just kind of like read messages stealthily to try to learn. And there's a lot of people who have lived through it in the group already. So, for example, for surrogacy, it's got its own subgroup. So people have, their Q&A there. So if you're looking for community, it's there. If you're looking for friendship, there are folks who are interested in that as well. You don't have to recreate the wheel. And we've also seen a lot of parents who are cishet themselves and don't really have an understanding of the queer community, and so we'll kind of tiptoe in to try to support their queer identified child, or who they think might grow up to be a queer identified person. There's space for them also. Like there's, we try to lead from kindness. We're all doing life for the first time, as they say, right? So none of us are professionals at anything. We're all just navigating this life as best we can and supporting one another. So for the allies, I always say have the group, not necessarily just ours, but like I said, there's tons of groups like ours for Dutch speakers or whatnot. Have them in mind. And if and when you come across a new queer colleague or a new, queer parent that you see at your park, maybe suggest that there are these communities out there because it's not something that you always think about, right? Like I said, I worked on becoming a dad for 10 years. I never thought about this part of parenting. And it does take a village, as they say, right? So everything from asking your questions to folks who, have done it or are doing it, to being the support network for folks that are just lost or feeling lonely or feeling homesick, where a lot of us, most of us, are living far, far away from our families. So just having surrogate uncles and aunties for the kids is quite beautiful. My daughter calls everyone Tia, which means auntie in Spanish. And so it's beautiful just to see that she's going to grow up surrounded by people that she feels safe with and who look out for her safety and will help her hopefully flourish.
Where can we find you for anyone who's interested in looking for you guys?
We're on Instagram, we're on TikTok, and unbeknownst to me, we're literally all over the internet. People message us from the US, from other countries, from all over Europe, because we are on parenting lists for the Netherlands, for example. We are on queer websites and listservs. We've also somehow made it to like the medical professional community because people will come in, will say like, oh, my doula recommended you, or my OBGYN recommended you, or our dentist recommended you. And I'm like, how? Like, it's awesome. It's wonderful that these folks know that we exist, but it's just, I guess, the power of the internet, as the kids say, right? Somehow it just kind of like spread and blossomed that way.
Well, Aldo, thank you so much for this conversation. And thank you so much for building your community, which is helping so many families out there in the Netherlands and many more to come, I'm sure.
Thank you for having us.
If you want to find Queer Families NL, you can find them on both Instagram and TikTok at queerfamilies.nl and find Aldo and his husband Kim at 2 Gay Dads in NL. I'll link everything in the show notes. And if today's episode has resonated with you, please do share it. Share it with a queer parent in your life, or share it with a teacher, a pediatrician, a playgroup organizer. Share it with anyone who works with families and wants to show up better. And if this is your first time here, welcome. You can find more than 200 episodes ready and waiting for you. And if you want to make sure you never miss one, hit follow wherever you're listening. You're listening to the Damn Parenting Podcast. I'm your host, Eva, and I'll see you next time.